Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to our Bhagavad-gita Satsang. I'm Hari-kirtana Das, and it is, as always, a great pleasure for me to be here with you and an honor to have you here with me. And if you would do me the honor of letting me know that I can be heard by raising your hands. Oh, Annie's way ahead of me. Thank you very much, all of you, for raising your hands. One moment, please. Excuse me. I did that just to demonstrate the proper way to sneeze in this particular day and time. I'm sure that's something that you are all very concerned about. There are some other concerns that I know you have that I want to address before we go any further with the class this evening. So just to reassure you, this is as long as my hair is going to get. Breaking out the buzzer, not waiting for my barber to come back. It's got to go. So I know this was probably of great concern to many of you who are regulars in the satsang and are used to seeing a different look. Now, the beard, however, the beard is kind of growing on me. And I think my goal is to be ready to get a job at the mall playing Santa Claus by November. So that could keep coming. Now that we've gotten some of the important stuff out of the way, let's get to the more trivial matter of our usual housekeeping, just to make sure we all have our technical ducks in a row. If you're new to the satsang, then this is useful information. Please note that you can adjust your audio settings and your viewing options, probably up in the upper right-hand corner, although the menu bar, I think, is movable. You can probably put it where you like. You need not worry about your microphone or your video camera, because while you can see and hear me, I cannot see or hear you. But if you would like to be heard, please type something into the chat window, comments, questions, laugh out louds, whatever you got. The Q&A box is also open, so if you'd like to put a question there, I will do my best to keep my eye out for your questions and comments and thoughts wherever they may pop up. Our last class, we spoke about letting go of obstacles, and the greatest secret, how to know Krishna, was revealed. We covered verses 52 through 58. And this evening, we're going to pick up at the point that we didn't quite get to, 3 verses that are clustered together where Krishna speaks about what our choices really are. And what we'll see in this evening's class is a statement about the nature of our free will at the beginning and the nature of our free will at the end of this cluster of verses. We will hear about the supreme director and hear Krishna's closing argument that he's making to Arjuna as he tries to convince him to fight a battle that, at least at the start of the Bhagavad-gita, Arjuna was not inclined to fight. So we're going to cover verses 58 through 63, and in a concession to reality, we are not going to cover verses 64, 65, 66, as I had sort of promised last time. Those 3 verses are so important, I don't want to rush them at the end. So next week, we are going to just focus on those 3 verses. So that's our plan. This is chapter 18, and we will be covering text 58 through 63. So the yoga of perfect renunciation, the conclusion of the Bhagavad-gita. So if you're new to the satsang and dropping in for the first time, you've caught us just about at the end. So I hope that you will find this class sufficiently informative and entertaining that you will feel inspired to go back to the earlier classes and follow the bouncing ball from start to finish. As is our usual procedure, we will chant our invocation mantra before we proceed with the verses. And a quick note for those of you who are new to the diacritical marks that serve as pronunciation cues in transliterated Sanskrit, Sanskrit that is rendered in the Roman alphabet. A dot over an M indicates that in addition to closing our lips in front, as we normally do with M's, we will also close the back of our tongue up to the back of the roof of our mouth, so we make a rounded shape inside our mouths, as if we were wrapping our mouth around a little walnut. A bar over a vowel, in this case an A, indicates an open and elongated version of that vowel, ah, as opposed to without the bar, in which case we get a short and more contained version of that same vowel, in this case, So I will chant this mantra, and if you like, you can chant it back. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Translation: I offer my respects to the Supreme Person, the Son of Vasudeva, who is the all-pervading transcendence. The son of Vasudeva in the Puranas is Krishna, the speaker of the Bhagavad-gita. Last week, we left off with verse 57. Thinking of all activities as an offering to me, being completely devoted to me, taking shelter of spiritual intelligence, always be conscious of me. This is a very comprehensive instruction that we get from Krishna as he winds up to deliver the pitch of his closing argument. And this is interesting insofar as how much is packed into these few words. Buddhi yogam means spiritual intelligence. And spiritual intelligence is defined in the Bhagavad-gita as understanding the difference between spirit and matter. Back in the 13th chapter, we hear Purusha Prakriti Stohi, that understanding the relationship between the Purusha, the conscious person, and Prakriti, material energy, is understood to be the first element of knowledge, which is why Krishna begins with this distinction all the way back in the very second chapter, his very initial instruction. And I want to point out that this is very different from other schools of yoga that you may have heard in terms of yoga philosophy. For example, in Shaivism, tantric yogic practices, which we commonly find derivatives of Shaivite and tantric thinking in modern yoga, we get the idea that the objective is to experience the oneness of Purusha and Prakriti. The union of these two results in a unity or a oneness. And I would like to be clear that this is not what the Bhagavad-gita is teaching, and the tradition, the Vedic tradition from which the Bhagavad-gita comes, does not promote this concept. So here, throughout the Gita, we have heard him make a clear distinction between spirit and matter, understanding the relationship between spirit and matter. But never has he said, if you understand the relationship between spirit and matter, you'll know that there is no relationship because they're one. You simply won't find a verse in the Bhagavad Gita that says that. You may read commentaries that somehow or other, by virtue of word jugglery and speculative interpretation, present this idea, but you won't find a verse that says it. So understanding these two distinct things, spirit and matter, spiritual energy and material energy, and therefore spiritual consciousness and material consciousness, two very different things. Seeing the difference between the infinitesimal individual spirit, or the jivatma, the jiva, and the infinite universal spirit, the paramatma. Understanding the three aspects of one absolute truth that has been referred to throughout the Gita, namely Brahman, the spiritual substratum of all existence, including the material world. Paramatma, as just mentioned, the supreme person localized within the heart of all other individual purushas or persons. And then Bhagavan, the personal form of the supreme personality of Godhead, Krishna himself speaking the Bhagavad-gita. Understanding the relationship between the infinitesimal parts, that's us, and the infinite complete whole, that's Krishna. So this is what's meant by spiritual intelligence, or buddhi yogam is the particular Sanskrit phrase that's used here. So here's how there's so much in just this one verse. The complete culmination of all four yoga systems in the Bhagavad Gita are spoken of here. Karma yoga, thinking of all activities as an offering to Krishna. Bhakti yoga, being completely devoted to me. Jnana yoga, taking shelter of spiritual intelligence. So the yoga of knowledge is the yoga of applied spiritual intelligence. And then dhyana yoga, the yoga of meditation. Always be conscious of me. So action yoga, karma yoga, devotional yoga, bhakti yoga, intellectual yoga or knowledge yoga, jnana yoga, and then meditation yoga, dhyana yoga. Those are the four kinds of yogas that Krishna speaks about throughout the Bhagavad Gita, and all of them are found in this verse. Question from Annie. So spirit and matter is not the same as unmanifest and manifest. Actually, you could say that it's the same, because manifest means you see it. You can experience it with your senses. And right now, for most of us, we are constrained to experience through material senses. Therefore, the material world is the manifest world. The spiritual world, which is right here, but we just can't see it, is unmanifest. Our own spiritual nature is unmanifest, because the spirit soul, the Purusha, is kind of asleep right now. And we're in the process of waking up our original spiritual consciousness with the alarm clock of transcendental sound. So in that sense, you could say that spirit is unmanifest to us at this time, and the material world is manifest, or that the material world comes into being as manifest and then goes out of being is unmanifest. And then the spiritual world, from the standpoint of a person whose spiritual senses are awake, is always manifest, whereas from the position of being covered over by illusion in the material world, it's unmanifest. So I hope that makes that clear. It's not like the spiritual is always unmanifest. It depends on whether your spiritual senses are awake or not, as to whether or not you experience it. Okay, so picking up where we left off, the next three verses, 58, 59, and 60, go together. And this is a summary of what Arjuna, and by extension us, will get if we take Krishna's advice and what we'll get if we don't. So I'm going to come back and share my screen with you. And actually, I'm going to take Annie's question for just a quick second here. But if what is manifest comes from the unmanifest, when aren't they, then aren't they one when duality is transcended? Yes and no. Remember, we've been speaking throughout the Gita about how things are both one and different at the same time. The Sanskrit for this is achintya bheda bheda tattva, simultaneously, inconceivably one and yet different. So for someone in spiritual consciousness, there's no difference between the material energy and the spiritual energy because it's all Krishna's energy and it's all meant to be used in Krishna's service. So in that sense, there's oneness. And in that sense, duality is transcended. But in another sense, there's still a distinction between matter and spirit because it's just not the same thing. Krishna describes the material cosmic manifestation as his external or separated energies, as opposed to his internal energies. So there's oneness at the point of self-realization, insofar as how someone sees things in relationship. That is to say, there's a oneness of intention. What is this material world for? Well, it's Krishna's energy, therefore you use it in Krishna's service. And what is the spiritual world? Well, that's the realm within which one resides in pure spiritual consciousness, even when one is moving about through the material world. And that is a jivan muktaha, someone who is liberated and experiencing their true spiritual nature, even while still moving about in this material world in a material body. So I hope that clarifies that for you a bit. And no, it isn't just Maya or illusion causing the distinction. It's a real distinction. The material world is a feature of reality, just as a dream is a feature of reality. But the dream is not as substantive as our waking life. Similarly, the material world is not as substantive as the spiritual world. So it's an actual feature of reality, this distinction between matter and spirit. Okay, so these three verses that we're going to finish up, that where Krishna gives us a sense of what our options are here. And this will say something about the nature and extent of our free will. So with text 58, if you become conscious of me, as he recommended in the previous verse, you will pass over all the obstacles of conditioned life by my grace. If, however, you do not work in such consciousness, but act through false ego, not hearing me, you will be lost. So notice how this is freedom by grace, not by our own effort, which is to say that we have to do our part by making an endeavor to offer our actions. This gets back to Ishvara Pranidhana, making an offering or offering one's life to the Supreme Person, making everything we do an act of sacrifice, so to speak, an offering. We have to do our best to engage in meditation on Krishna, on the Supreme Person, which involves some control of the mind and senses in order to direct the mind in meditation toward the ultimate object of meditation, the Supreme Person. So there's some effort there, but what that does is that qualifies us for grace. Because the best effort we can make will still not be enough by itself. And this is why both the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad-gita recommend meditation on Ishvara, because Ishvara is a person who really cares about us and responds to us and is anxious to help us out and is in the best position to help us, a far better position than we are to help ourselves. Otherwise, confinement to material existence and exposed to the dangers of material existence that come about when we are duped by our false ego to think that we are the controllers and enjoyers of this material world, rather than being controlled by the divine energy of material nature, and subsequently having to deal with sometimes enjoyment, sometimes suffering. So the phrase "you will be lost" means you will be lost in the material world. You'll continue to wander through the cycle of birth and death over and over and over again, not knowing which way is the exit. And Krishna thinks this is so important that he's going to stay with this for another verse or two. So he continues, "If you do not act according to my direction and do not fight," because remember, Krishna is trying to convince Arjuna to fight a battle he doesn't want to fight, "then you will be falsely directed. By your nature, you will have to be engaged in warfare." So Arjuna is a warrior. And one way or another, because this is actually his conditioned nature, as long as he is in the material world and under the influence of material nature, he's going to be obliged to act a certain way. All of us are obliged to act in a certain way. Our responses to the world are not as free as we would like to believe, because we all have a conditioned nature according to the kind of body that we've got. I've got a body and a mind and a set of senses that react to the world one way, and it's not like I'm totally free from my material conditioning to respond to the world in any possible way. It's actually a fairly narrow bandwidth of possibilities. And then you also have a particular nature that dictates how you will respond to the world. Everyone does. And it's not just human beings. A fun thing to do, at least I think it's fun, is to look at really close-up photos of really, really small creatures on Instagram. And I think, wow, this is amazing. I mean, if you look at, bugs, sometimes they're really gross and horrible looking, but they're amazing looking. I mean, they're just totally far out. I mean, a close-up, you look at a spider, man, it looks like it's from another planet. There are just so many amazing far out designs of nature for living beings to be able to have a material body of so many different varieties. And a spider has to act like a spider. Couldn't just change its mind and act like a cat or a cow. It's not going to happen. And similarly, a cow cannot act like a spider, and a dog cannot act like a tortoise, etc. You act in a certain way according to the body you've got. And those living beings are Purushas also, conditioned by material nature. The difference, of course, is that human beings have the opportunity of self-inquiry and the opportunity to make improvements, elevate one's consciousness, purify one's heart. It's a special gift of a human form of life that we have this opportunity for svadhyaya, guided study of the true nature of the self. In our conditioned state, without proper spiritual guidance, and just trying to figure it out on our own, false direction, will be falsely directed by illusion, because we are subject to illusion, subject to imperfect senses. And Arjuna was bewildered by the influence of his false ego when he considered that he was the one who was making things happen on the battlefield, and if he left the battlefield, nothing would happen, as if he were directing the good and bad results of his actions. And here Krishna is saying, no, I've already told you that this battle is going to go on with you or without you. You're either going to walk away and everyone's going to think you're a coward, or you're going to fight and get credit for the victory that I've already assured you. One way or another, though, he's telling Arjuna, you're going to act according to your nature, and you can't run away from that. So the choice we're being given is we can take direction from the material energy or direction from the source of the material energy. Either way, here's the takeaway here. It's our nature to be directed, not to be the director. And the influence of the false ego is the illusion of I am the director. And the false ego hates this proposition. And the mind's job is to protect the false ego, among other things. And that is why the mind hates meditation. And that's why when you read books of transcendental knowledge, your mind just wants to say, go to sleep, be bored, this is boring. Or don't you want to do anything but this? And therefore, the gaining control over the mind is part of yoga. It also requires humility to make the effort to control the mind and not be influenced by our false ego. Which takes us to verse 60, where Krishna concludes this portion of his argument. O son of Kunti, Arjuna, that which due to illusion you do not wish to do, you will be compelled to do by your own nature. So you notice how in the last couple of verses, he's really talked about the influence of material nature on consciousness. And back in the 3rd chapter, he spoke about how even those who possess knowledge act according to their own nature. So even if Arjuna completely understands this spiritual science that Krishna is teaching him, even if we completely understand and accept Krishna's teachings in the Bhagavad-gita, we will still act according to the nature that we've inherited due to our karma, due to the way that the qualities of material nature influence us in this particular mind-body complex. And Krishna poses a kind of rhetorical question in this 33rd verse of the 3rd chapter. He says, everyone acts according to the tendencies they have acquired due to contact with the 3 qualities of material nature, namely goodness, passion, and ignorance. And then the rhetorical question is, what will repression accomplish? So here Krishna makes a pretty strong statement about either trying to act in an artificial way, denying the nature that we have acquired in this particular body due to our karma. And it also speaks to the idea of spiritual bypassing. You can't pretend with any real success to be more spiritually advanced than you are. And spiritual advancement doesn't mean you necessarily change what you do. It changes why you do it. If it's conducive for your spiritual life, it changes the frame of reference you have for what you do. It may change what you do if you decide that what you do according to your nature is not conducive for spiritual advancement, and you want to change your habits. You want to become a more spiritual person, so you act in a more spiritual way. And that means you may give up things that don't serve the mission, the project of becoming spiritually advanced. And then that may become a real challenge because it may be deeply embedded in your nature. You may have very intense impressions on your mind, some scars, that will require some work, some renunciation in order to smooth out so that they don't become or continue to be impediments in our spiritual lives. So this is where we might make a change or make an effort to change our behavior. But all the things that we do are general nature. 9 times out of 10, you'll find that you can somehow or other dovetail that into your spiritual life. So inaction is not what's being recommended here. In fact, Arjuna would prefer inaction. And Krishna is saying, no, if you refuse to act under my direction, then you're going to be compelled to act. And everyone is under the spell of a particular combination of these qualities of material nature, and they're acting in this way. And Arjuna is no exception, and neither are we. But anyone who voluntarily undertakes to engage in the yoga of devotion, to accept the direction of the person who is actually in control of material nature, namely Krishna, the supreme person, then that's a very glorious situation for us because it brings us under the protection of the internal energy, the spiritual energy of Krishna, rather than exposing us to the dangers of the external energy, namely the possibility, in fact, the very high likelihood of old age, disease, death, and rebirth again and again and again. So I'll pause here for just a moment and see if we have any questions or comments about what I have covered so far. So if you have any questions, reflections, please go ahead and pop those into the chat and share them with us. And I will do my best to respond. Meanwhile, Javier, you're very welcome. All right, so now we're finally up to this week's verses. 60, officially this week's verses. We thought we were going to cover these last 3 last week. So beginning with 61. And Javier continues, what we think are sometimes traits or faults could be inherited from a previous life. Yes, we have plenty of stuff, even though we don't remember our previous lives, at least most of us don't. We don't come into this world a blank slate. We bring plenty of baggage from our previous energy body, mental emotional body, intellectual body, bliss body. Those 4 of the 5 sheaths or coverings, koshas, are the transport mechanism that bring us to the next body, the next physical or food body that's shaped around that. So yeah, we bring plenty of things with us from previous lives, even though we don't remember the specifics of the previous life. So if you're wondering, like, how did I get like this? How did I possibly, develop this particular way of being or this way of thinking? Where did that come from? Well, this is carryovers from previous lives. And once you posit samsara and karma, then a lot of otherwise inexplicable stuff falls into place. at least as far as our experience is concerned. So we're going to chant this next verse. This is verse 61, the 18th chapter. And I'll say a little bit more about the diacritics in the transliterated Sanskrit. An accent mark over an S is an SH sound that's sounded from all the way back in your jaw. So you're going to curl your tongue back and make the sound from back here, as opposed to a regular SH sound, which would come out from behind your teeth. Shh. A dot under an H is a short stop on the vowel that precedes it, unless that dot under the H appears at the end of a word at the end of the line, which does not happen in this particular verse. I've already discussed bars across vowels and dots over M's. A dot under an R indicates you're going to curl your tongue back into about 2/3 of the way to the roof of your mouth, as opposed to bringing your top teeth over your bottom lip. An apostrophe indicates a dropped vowel, meaning that the vowel in the word that precedes the word that begins with the apostrophe will go straight into the next word. This is a rule of euphonic combination for the poetry and the cadence. A dot under an S is a regular SH sound. A dot under a T is a T sound sounded in the center of the roof of your mouth as opposed to right behind your teeth. So it's the difference between ta and ka. All letters are sounded, therefore TH is a ka sound as opposed to a th sound. And that's all, folks. Oh, D with a dot under it, same deal. Instead of D right behind your teeth, duh, into the center of your mouth with the tip of your tongue, ga. I will chant each line, and if you like, you can chant each line back. Ishvara sarva bhutanam hridesher junatishtati brahmayan sarva bhutani yantrarudhani mayaya Translation. O Arjuna, the Supreme Lord resides within everyone's heart and directs the wanderings of all living beings, who travel as if riding in a mystical machine that's composed of my illusory material energy. So this is a very important and oft quoted verse in the Bhagavad-gita. Hriddeshe means in the location of the heart of all living entities, not the heart of the physical body, but the heart of the Purusha, the heart of the person, the living being within the body. And Brahmayan means causing to travel. And yantra means on a machine. So sarva bhutani, all living entities who are embodied, yantra, in something that's like a machine. So this body is likened to a car that we're riding around in that's composed of Krishna's illusory material energy. So it's basically like riding around in a car in your dream, which in my case means instead of driving a Prius, I'd be driving a Ferrari. My karma is such that I've got a Prius instead of a Ferrari. What can be done? There are three basic ideas that are spoken about in this verse. The first, the Paramatma, the supreme person, residing within the heart of each person. The idea that the spirit soul, the Purusha or the Jiva, is not the material body, which is like a machine that we're riding around in, and that the material body is made of illusory energy. Seems really real. And yet somehow it's a feature of reality that's just not as real as the real reality of spiritual existence. And as I gave the example before, like a dream is a feature of reality, and yet it doesn't have the same substantive quality as our waking life. And there are three previous verses that are also being summarized in this verse. And Sue, I see your question or comment, so I'm going to get to it in just a moment. Back in the 6th chapter, the 7th verse, Krishna says that one who has conquered the mind reaches the supreme self within the heart and attains tranquility. For one so situated, heat and cold, pleasure and displeasure, honor and dishonor are all the same. So in other words, upon the realization, that is to say, the direct experience of the presence of the supreme person within one's own heart, one immediately attains a transcendental position from which one is simply not disturbed by the external circumstances of the material world. Wouldn't that come in handy right about now? In the 13th chapter, a verse that I hearkened back to earlier, a person thus situated in material nature experiences a mode of being born of that nature. Clinging to an identity that arises from the qualities of material nature, one meets with good and evil in the course of taking birth among various species. So, some people, due to the influence of illusion, think, I'm a Prius. Other people think, I'm a Ferrari. Some people can go really, really fast, and others, not quite so fast. It really just depends on what kind of body you have, which under the influence of illusion, you identify as being because you think, I am this body. And in the next verse, Krishna says, there is yet another in this body, the witness, the sustainer and giver of consent, the transcendental enjoyer known as the Supreme Self, who is the highest person. So we get different bodies according to our karma. But the person who ultimately signs off on whether you get a Prius or a Ferrari is the supreme person within the heart. And then the third verse that kind of is summarized by this verse that we're looking at is in the 15th chapter, the 7th verse, where Krishna says, the eternal living beings in this world of conditioned life are fragmental parts of my very self. Drawn to material nature, they struggle with the senses, the sixth of which is the mind. So we all get the situation in material life that we have earned by virtue of our previous actions. Therefore, our current situation is a karmic reaction to our past actions. And the particular shape that our material bodies take and the condition that we get, that's all signed off on, that all goes on under the direction of the supersoul or the Paramatma, the supreme person within the heart. So once again, we are being directed by the supreme person in this material world when we are under the influence of illusion or the divine energy of that same supreme person. And Krishna's recommendation is, you know, I'm directing you one way or another, work with me. Instead of trying to work against me or work without me, work with me. I'm actually a really good partner. So direct surrender to the controller of the illusory material energy is what Krishna is suggesting would be better than surrender to the influence of his illusory energy, which is so difficult to overcome on our own. So let me know if you have any questions or comments about this. Let me see what Sue has to say here. This struck me when you said it takes humility to make the effort. Seems like so many people are quickly dismissive of spiritual practices. They ask yoga teachers questions, but quickly respond. They say they can't sit still that long, or yoga's too slow for them, without really giving the practices and written wisdom or their own understanding of yoga philosophy much time for real consideration. Yes, I think this is true. This may be one of the silver linings of our current disastrous situation. Disasters have a way of forcing us to change what we're doing. And once we get over the shock and the denial and the panic and anger and the depression of what we are losing in our current situation. Our current situation, for those of you who are watching this in the distant future, is we are mid-stride in a COVID-19 pandemic as I offer this class. And it's going to change things. We're in a sandhya, a juncture of time. And so my hope is that we will consider that the way we were doing things wasn't really working so well. And one of those things was thinking we never have time for spiritual practices. We never have time for contemplative work, for reflection. I was speaking with someone not too long ago about the passing of my father. This was some time ago. And he never took any time that I know of to be reflective about the meaning of his life. And so when it became undeniably obvious that the end was near, I saw a man who really had no idea what his life was for, why he had lived at all, what was the point. And it was sad to see. And it was difficult because I was the only person he knew that had any semblance of a spiritual life. And it put us in the awkward position of his wanting to ask me questions, but only being able to do it from the position of being my father, which meant in our case, he had to find fault with whatever it was I was thinking and challenge me to defend it or justify it. And I had the awkward position of trying to share something of my experience with him without taking the position of being my father's teacher, because that's just wrong. That's just not, you know, how those relationships are supposed to go. We think we don't have time. We think we don't have the patience. We can make the time. We can cultivate the patience if we see the value of self-inquiry. And so it's my sincere hope that as things in the external world change, people feel inspired to turn inward and decide that yoga isn't something they don't have time for, and that patience is something they can cultivate for the sake of higher knowledge of the self and one's relationship with the world, and attaining that space, that place, that situation where the tumultuous goings on of the external world simply do not disturb the peace of someone who is Atmarama, experiencing the bliss of the self. You're welcome, Jessica. Have a wonderful meeting. All right. So moving on to the next verse, 62. Translation. O descendant of Bharat, another name for Arjuna, Surrender unto him utterly. By his grace, you will attain transcendental peace and the supreme and eternal abode. So here, Krishna is speaking about himself in the third person. He has gone back and forth between speaking of the Paramatma as if the Paramatma were someone else, which in a sense, the Paramatma is. The Paramatma is an expansion of Krishna. Krishna is the personal form of the absolute truth, Bhagavan, and then there's the expansion by which the Supreme Person is omniscient, Paramatma, present everywhere, knowing everything, seeing everything all the time. So this is a verse that we can look at from the standpoint of marketing. Modern messaging, when you're trying to sell something, tells us that we want to communicate three things to our prospective customer. What is it? Who is it for? What will they get? So, what is it? It's Krishna. Krishna is selling himself. He's selling himself in the third person, but what he's doing is he's selling himself as the ultimate product and giving us information about how he can be purchased. From the 6th chapter, we hear that one who is immersed in the experience of unity, that is to say, one who understands the spiritual unity of everything, offers their love to me, which means that that unity still has to have some difference, because an offering of love requires a lover, a beloved, and love itself to connect them. Offers their love to me as the one who abides in all beings. So here Krishna is identifying himself as, I'm the one who resides in all being. In the 8th chapter, again, he tells Arjuna that the governing principle of this material manifestation is to be perishable. And the principle by which the demigods are governed is called the person, or the universal form of the Lord. And I alone, situated within the body, am the governing principle of sacrifice. So here again, he identifies himself as being the Paramatma, the Supreme Person. And then again in the 10th chapter, he'll do the same thing. I am the innermost soul of all souls, seated within the heart of all living beings. So what is it? It's Krishna. Who is it for? Back in the 7th chapter, Krishna identifies the characteristics of his customer. There are 4 kinds of people who are inclined toward the principles of religion or dharma, and thus they offer their devotion to me, Krishna. Then he gives the 4. Those who are distressed, those who seek knowledge, those who seek wealth, and those who have obtained knowledge. So now many of us are distressed. Some percentage of those distressed people will now start asking like the big questions, the serious questions. And they become people who seek knowledge. Those who seek wealth, who seek prosperity, are also tend to look to God to answer their prayers for material wealth. But in the next verse, Krishna says that of these, the one who has complete knowledge and thus remains ever united with me through singular devotion is the best. I am very dear to such a one, and they are dearly beloved by me. Later, Krishna will talk about how he's equally disposed toward all living beings, but even so, he holds those who honor him and make offerings of love to be special to him, and feels a kinship with them. So this is an interesting aspect of the Supreme Person. You know, this is also natural. We can be equal to all, but yet there are some people who offer us love and we love them back. Where does that come from? It comes from where everything else comes from. It comes from the Supreme Person. So what do you get? What is it? It's Krishna. Who's it for? It's for these kind of people. What do you get? You get transcendental peace and the supreme and eternal abode. The transcendental world is described in Vedic literature, in the Rig Veda specifically, as Tad Vishno Paramam Padam, the paramount place is the realm of Vishnu, the kingdom of God, another way to put it. The Sanskrit word for the spiritual sky is Vaikuntha, meaning that place where there's no anxiety, no stress, total peace. Everything's chill. Everyone's got nothing to worry about. And then our final verse for this evening, this is verse 63. Thus I have described to you the most confidential secret of all. Carefully consider everything that I have said and then do as you wish. Now this is extraordinary. Here is the Supreme Being, God if you like, saying, I've told you the most confidential thing. The phrase here, the Sanskrit phrase here is guyad guyataram. So guyat, confidential, then confidential. Guyataram, still more confidential. So Krishna is saying, I've told you a secret that's bigger than the biggest secret ever. And now, decide for yourself what you want to do about it. That's extraordinary. It's the most, if someone has trouble understanding the Bhagavad-gita, if it's challenging, well, that shouldn't be surprising because Krishna, speaking from the position of the Supreme Being, thinks it's the most confidential, super amazing, far out secret in the world. And if that's God's opinion, if we accept that Krishna is speaking from the position of God, well, no wonder it's like not the easiest thing to wrap your head around. But now it's like the Sanskrit phrase here is yatechasi tata kuru. As you like, you may act. Indicating that God does not interfere with the little bit of independence that we've got, which is to say, this is the extent of our free will. We can choose to be directed by the divine illusory energy of material existence, or we can choose to be an instrument of divine will. And this is the choice that Krishna is giving to Arjuna. The word jnanam, which is also found in the Sanskrit in this verse, is linked to guyataram. So this denotes supreme wisdom, super secret, high level information, top secret information. You have to have like real high level clearance to get this classified information. So now we have the opportunity to reflect on what our choice is going to be. Here we've been given this information. That's the purpose of Krishna speaking the Bhagavad-gita. And like Arjuna, we have a certain amount of free will that gives us a choice as to what we want to do. And that takes us to the end of tonight's class. We spoke about our choice, spiritual material consciousness, who is the supreme director of everything, We heard Krishna's closing argument and his confirmation of our free will at the end, and at the beginning, where the realm of our free will is constrained. What's our actual field of free will? So with that, any questions? Please let me know. Yeah, it's a pretty big choice to make, because it really does potentially change the way you live your life, or change what you live your life for. What is the purpose of your life? That's your big question that so often we skip over as we just follow the dictates of the mind that tells us what we're supposed to like or not like. Glenna, thank you for providing this space to study yoga philosophy. I appreciate it. Sure, of course. My pleasure. This is my idea of a good time. I would love to hear more from you, questions, comments, reflections, whatever it is that you are thinking about, or whatever our discussion this evening has brought up for you. So if you have questions after the fact, please reach out to me, Hari@Hari-kirtana.com. I'll always be very happy to hear from you. And I hope you will join me next week, next Thursday night. Katie, great minds think alike. So next Thursday night, we will cover verses 64, 65, and 66. This is the crescendo of the Bhagavad-gita and the crown jewel of transcendental knowledge that Krishna has to offer us in the Bhagavad-gita. So I sincerely hope that you will join me next week for that. And you're welcome, Lisa Marie. Very glad that you could be here. Last questions or comments. Is each being given the same degree of capability to, Robert, do you want to finish that? Because I think you may have accidentally hit enter right there. Emily, you're very welcome. I'm just want to wait a second for the rest of Robert's question. And I don't want to guess on what that might be. To access free with the same will. Well, we all have the same free will. Whether or not we can access it, this is a great question, by the way. So we all have the same kind of free will in that we can make this choice. However, the ability to access that free will depends on how thick and heavy the covering is. That is to say, someone who's really covered over by the material energy and really influenced by the lower modes of passion and ignorance will find it more difficult, will feel less of an attraction for the very idea of this kind of thought, this kind of reflection or introspection. This search for meaning is attractive to a particular kind of person. And the more we gravitate towards the mode of goodness, the greater our free will becomes. That is to say, we have greater access to our free will. Someone in a lower form of life altogether, a lower life form, is not a lesser spirit soul, but is covered over more completely by material nature and therefore does not have access to this particular choice. They just have to act like the life form that they are currently embodying. So the same choice is there for everyone, but it's a really good question. Not everyone has the same level of access to that level of free will and therefore are more or less subject to the laws of material nature. Lisa Marie. Robert, I hope that answers your question, and I hope that is satisfactory to others. Lisa Marie, does Krishna get upset if we use our free will not to follow his wishes? Krishna doesn't get upset about anything. But just like, for example, let us assume that a loving parent wishes the best for their child, and they actually have some knowledge and wisdom that the child does not have due to simply lack of experience. But the child, being full of themselves and thinking that they know it all, which happens to some children. It certainly didn't happen to me as a teenager. They may disregard the parents' good advice and seek some independence that is from the parent that is not in their best interest. So Krishna has feelings. So there is, if there's one thing that Krishna doesn't have, it's our love. And he'd like to have it because he loves us. So Krishna is both completely detached and unaffected by our misuse of what little independence we have when we take shelter of the material world rather than the spiritual. But at the same time, he also has feelings for us. And feelings can be hurt. So if you love someone and they don't love you back, how do you feel? Well, Krishna has that feeling too. But he doesn't get like angry at us in the same way that we have a conception of an angry, jealous God from the Abrahamic traditions. That's not how Krishna rolls, according to the Krishna Bhakti tradition. Anger manifests. There are incarnations. For example, Lord Nrsingadev, the half-man, half-lion incarnation, is the personification of Krishna's anger, which is directed at the demon Hiranyakashipu. This is a very powerful demon. His name means gold and soft beds. So someone who wants wealth and sex. Now, I personally have an unlimited desire for wealth and sex. That is something I would like Lord Nrsingadev to rip to shreds with his claws. So I ask Lord Nrsingadev, this incarnation of Lord Vishnu or Krishna, to please enter into my heart and rip my false ego to shreds and get rid of all of these desires that are just impediments to my spiritual advancement. So you could say that that's one way that Krishna manifests anger on behalf of the someone who's devoted to him for their benefit. I hope that satisfactorily answers your question. And we are a little past our, you're very welcome. Good. So we're a little past our time, and we all have places to go, things to be, places to do. So I'm going to adjourn for this evening. If you do have further questions, please send them to me. I am always, 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 always very, very happy to hear from you. Thank you very much for being here this evening and for sticking around. Costa Rica, wonderful place. Robert, thank you for being here. I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Have a nice night.